I'm actually a computer scientist, not a political scientist. I'll bring a different perspective, and I want to dive a little bit deeper in one particular emerging form of democracy that's heavily technology dependent, that Helene actually alluded to. And I think there's a huge amount of promise in this emerging form of democracy, although it has a long way to go before it's really ready to rely on. So I'll say that up front. So to introduce the idea, I first want to go back and look at the basic kind of dominant form of democracy that we tend to use. And I have to apologize, being a computer scientist, I'm going to have to subject you to a couple computer science concepts, but I will try to do it gently, namely scalability and information compression. But don't be too scared, don't run out just yet. So I'll try to be gentle if you're not familiar with these concepts. So if we look at a representative democracy, the basic idea is we have a lot of citizens, voters, who elect a small number of representatives to represent them. The representatives form a government, or at least the leadership of a government, and that leadership manages the typically much larger bureaucracies and other public service systems in comprising the whole public service of a modern society. Now, this kind of works. It's like they say, it's better than practically anything else we've tried and managed for any amount of time. On the other hand, it has some major known problems. The issue I want to focus on is what I call, again, kind of as a technical person, the information and accountability bottleneck. So the problem that voters typically interact with the government only once every few years, and in a very limited way, namely to elect this very small group of representatives, and which means that all of the information about the voters' preferences is going to the government through this small bottleneck of the very small group of representatives, and all the accountability of the government to the people has to basically come back through that same bottleneck at the top of the diagram, right? So through the top of the pyramid. So that, again, that kind of works, but maybe it could be better. So that's the question that we're trying to answer. Now, to illustrate this issue, now is when I subject you to the concept of information compression, and I'll use the analogy of just an image. Let's say a well-informed voter has a really good picture of what he or she wants from the government, from a government, a democracy, but then because we have to aggregate that voter's information with hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of other voters' preferences, we have to compress that information. And just pushing this analogy a little bit, if you can take an image that looks like that and compress it, say 100 to 1, you divide the amount of information in it by 100, well, it looks like that, right? And if you compress it further and compress it into like 10,000 to 1, well, it's starting to really look, hard to get anything, to see anything useful in there, right? Just as an analogy, in the US, where I come from, each congressional seat represents about 700,000 voters, right? And so this means, in effect, the preferences of about 700,000 people are getting information compressed into one small decision of one small seat, right? This is hugely over-compressed information from a computer science perspective. It means we practically lost all content, right? So now, we haven't lost anything. We at least get one very useful bit of information, namely the ability for the voters to punish the government for misbehavior. So it's often been observed that when voters are happy with things the way they're going, they keep the current government. When they're not happy, they can get them out and do something else. So that is a very useful one bit of information. But again, the question is, can we do better, right? So Which brings me to the contrasting, the kind of opposite end of the spectrum that many people, myself included, think is kind of a really good ideal to shoot for, the idea of direct democracy. Let's get the voters really directly involved regularly, constantly in the democratic process. So like in a town hall meeting, this works very well in small groups. When issues come up, the people meet, discuss the issues, decide on specific issues, and vote on them. Now, this works in small groups, and it's often, and I think rightly, been asked, well, can we use technology in the right way to scale this up, to make it work for much larger populations, much larger democracies? And I think this is a great idea, although also very problematic. I don't want to gloss over the huge issues in using technology for this kind of purpose. But so let's push this a little bit. So, this is a beautiful dream. Can we really get the voters involved all the time in real decisions? And so like I said, there are major technical problems, but I don't want to talk to you right now about those problems. I think, personally, as a computer scientist, I think with the will and the research and the deployment, we can solve the technology problems, I really think. So I want to talk to you about the human problems. And the human and social problems with direct democracy is they're made of people. Well, that's a good thing and a bad thing, because people, people are only people. And people have varying amounts of time, attention, and commitment. This is just, we vary in all sorts of ways, including this. And there's nothing wrong with us because of that. It's just the way we are. But it affects the way direct democracy works. Also, people have widely varying amounts of knowledge and expertise on any given issue. It's often been observed that in direct democracy groups, large and small, often the loudest, but not necessarily the most expert, can dominate just in terms of time and push out the quieter elements that might not have the time or patience to argue it out. And finally, people inherently have only 24 hours in a day, and as a result, even in small groups, direct democracy can effectively disenfranchise those who just don't have the time to participate in every issue. Their vote gets lost, and often the people with not so much time often are the most sought after experts in this or that topic, right? And in a sense, they're often the ones we would most like to keep participating, right? So can we? So ultimately, this boils down to the problem that direct democracy really doesn't scale, and this is where I want to dive into the notion of scalability a little bit more. So this is a graph of about 100 countries with population on the x-axis and the number of people in the public sector workforce on the y-axis. And I'm using this as a very loose, rough proxy for the amount of governance work that apparently needs to be done to keep a modern society running, right? The only important point here is, regardless of whether we're talking about a big government country or a small government country or any country, the line is pretty straight. It makes a pretty straight line, which means effectively the amount of governance work, the amount of governance issues to deal with one way or another grows proportionally. This creates what we call a scalability challenge, where in a small group of 20 participants who might have 10 issues to discuss, well, that's manageable. Everybody can discuss those issues and deal with them. If we try to scale that up so that there are 20 million participants, say the size of a country like Chile, we're probably going to have on the order of 10 million issues to discuss or to deal with one way or another, and that's just never going to work in a pure democratic fashion. Of course, we don't necessarily need, that's a naive way to do it. We don't need really pure direct democracy. And many approximations already exist, including the country I moved to just recently, Switzerland, which has put a form of direct democracy into effect for hundreds of years now. But Switzerland is a small country. Most voting is done in even smaller units, and most government is still a mostly representative system with direct democracy as part of it. So, which brings me to the main point, the emerging paradigm that I think is really exciting and worth exploring further, which goes by different terms, such as the two most common are delegative or liquid democracy. I had a very small early part in this, in that when I was a grad student at MIT, I got interested in future approaches to democracy, and I wrote this small paper, put it online, never actually really finished it or published it. It's a pretty bad paper, don't read it. But it turned out that, you know, I was far from alone. About that time, a lot of other people on the internet were kind of reinventing different versions of this same idea in slightly different forms, but with a lot of common underlying themes. And some precedents even went back before, but it was really with the emergence of the internet that this really exploded. And so what is liquid democracy or delegative democracy? Well, basically, it's the attempt to combine the best of representative and direct democracy. What does that mean? So if we think of the way we can make direct democracy work at least a little bit better, nobody can be an expert in everything, right? So people have to take shortcuts in processing information. If I can't, for example, if I can't follow everything, I'm going to ask a friend or get the opinion of a trusted expert. And maybe if I like their opinion, maybe I'll vote the way they suggest. And this is, and the fundamental idea of liquid democracy is just to accept that as actually a good thing, taking advice, and to automate that. So, for example, if we're in a direct democracy and healthcare is a hot topic, and there are many healthcare issues to discuss and vote on, but I don't have time to follow all of those, and I don't have the expertise, but I do know someone, a friend, a doctor, or someone, an expert who I trust to represent me. I can basically delegate my vote to them. I can say, okay, I'm going to vote their way until I decide otherwise. It's my choice who to delegate to and how long to delegate, completely my choice, so individual choice, and I can vote myself at any time too, right? So this has several very important advantages, this concept. So first of all, on different topics, I can delegate to different experts. So in representative democracy, an important kind of weakness is the representatives effectively have to be jacks of all trades, to use a standard English term. They have to be generalists and kind of try to understand everything. But nobody can understand everything, so you know, representatives kind of have to specialize in politics instead of specializing any of the particular topics that they have to make policy for. Liquid democracy allows voters to delegate in different issues to different people who are at least more expert than they are in those particular issues. It also increases choice. So, like I said, I don't have to delegate to one of a very small number of candidates that have passed the high thresholds of a particular system. I can delegate to anyone I trust to represent me. Your choice is limited only by the people that you know. And finally, going back to the pyramid diagram I mentioned before with the information and accountability bottleneck, excuse me, this, I believe, solves that because it allows us allows voters to delegate to more specialized, more lower level representatives that can have much deeper, richer interactions with government than in traditional representative democracy. So that's the theory. Just to briefly mention some of the practice. So this is an idea that has actually been tried several times, and is, even more groups are trying it now. It's, I think, an emerging thing. The biggest trial so far has been by the German Pirate Party in the late 2000s, and they built a system called liquid feedback, and we're using it for several years with some success, some challenges. We learned a ton from this experience, and we need more experiments like this. I won't get into the details, but then more recently, another effort from a group in Argentina built another system called Democracy OS. And more efforts like this are continuing, and these are incredibly important to explore this space. Now, this isn't all good. You know, can something, you know, this sounds great, what can go wrong? Well, a lot can go wrong, I guarantee. So there are important risks and weaknesses with this model that we also have to recognize. I don't have time to talk about those now. I'll be talking about them in a longer session in a separate event later this afternoon. But I think we can solve those issues with the right effort and the right combination of technology and community efforts. So, in conclusion, liquid democracy is an emerging new approach to participation that basically gives voters individual choice of whether to participate a little or a lot in a given topic, which topics to follow and vote on directly, and whose advice to trust. And basically, it's a tool that allows, in principle, allows us to make democracy scale. So, and to make it happen, we're going to need we're going to need communities, academic researchers, technologists, and governments to come together to put the right pieces together, figure out really what works and what doesn't, because there's a lot of questions still to answer, but I think we can do it. Thank you very much.